Welcome to On the Mic with Ed. Today you are with myself, Maria Ortiz, Dr. Zoe Ross-Nash, and our guest, Emily Suma. Today we're going to be talking a lot about eating disorders in sports, a lot of emphasis on swimming today, with some extras about gymnastics and dance as well.
Absolutely. We're so excited to have you. And we also wanted to officially thank our advertisers. We have Alsana Treatment Center, and they have treatment providers all over the country in their virtual, I believe it's an IOP program, and they're also available in California and Alabama. So thank you, Alsana, for being our first advertiser. We're so glad to have you.
Yes, we love partnering with treatment centers to kind of connect our community together. So Emily Suma is with us today. I'll let her share a little bit about who she is, what she does. But today we are bringing her to share about her expertise relating to swimming and maybe even some body image eating disorder pathology that she saw in that environment.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Love what you guys are doing. It's so important. It's so needed. I feel honored. So thanks so much for having me. I am from Florida. I currently work as an occupational therapist, but for most of my life, which is kind of how we met a little bit and bonded in the beginning in middle school, is I was a competitive swimmer, started as a gymnast. So that took up I don't know, 10, 12 years of my life. I'd have to go back and count the years and days, but huge part of my identity. I know you're familiar with dance, you're familiar with gymnastics. So yeah, it's been a crazy ride. It's been a whirlwind.
Well, we kind of wanted to get started with you maybe answering some things of how did you see eating disorders or disordered eating show up in the sport of swimming? Are there any nuances relating to that that maybe are different from other sports that you saw?
Well, I think first and foremost, the uniform that you have to wear in swimming itself is extremely exposing, as I'm sure you know, being in gymnastics and also dance related as well. I did a lot of other sports growing up. I did golf, tennis, soccer, basketball, volleyball, and swimming. I definitely felt the most exposed. I was the most aware of when I was doing what I was doing, how did my body look? What did other people perceive my body to look like? Not to, disregard anybody else's experience in any other sports, but simply based on the uniform that we weren't wearing clothes. We were clothed most of the time and we were wet. Every part of us were completely exposed. You could see things that normally you don't necessarily see. I think it made me a lot more hyper aware of how others were perceiving me and how I was perceiving myself too.
Oh, do you remember what age you first started to notice that, my body is being perceived right now?
Honestly, so I think I started around when I was 12, and I don't think it fully hit me until more of like the high school years. So I would say like 2 to 3 years later. But even then, when I was in high school and when I was swimming for my club team, we had such like a diverse melting pot of people swimming for my club team. We had all ages, depending on like if you were a good enough swimmer and you were 13 years old, you'd be in the highest level group, right? So we had 13 to 18-year-olds, men, women, all shapes and sizes, even sometimes master swimmers, 50, 60-year-olds swimming with us. So I did feel more in club swimming that I could kind of like blend into the background a little bit and I wasn't being as perceived versus when I got to college and I'm around women who are 18 to 21 years old in a much smaller group of people. I really started to like make comparisons between how I looked and how others who were my similar like age stature really looked. So in club it wasn't so much like there, but when the college level arose, it was really prevalent.
So those are kind of the comparisons that you were drawing kind of on your own accord, because obviously you can look in the mirror and then you can also look across the room. Was there also kind of like any problematic language that you would hear either from other swimmers or from, coaches or anything of that nature around bodies or what they should look like, quote unquote, in those outfits and things of that nature?
Yeah, so especially around like competition time, I'm sure hopefully you guys have watched maybe like one, Olympic swim meet and how those women wear,
Yeah.
the fast skins. It's
Yeah.
not just your practice suits, it's those fast skins that go down to your knee
Right.
and come up to your body. And if you've seen them, you remember they are like, I'm not kidding you, this big. and you order them like 6 sizes down, so they be completely, this is the norm.
Wow.
So they'd be completely skin tight on your body for competition. So there was a lot of language around make sure you lean out to fit in your fast skin. And when you're putting on your fast skin, you have at least like 1 to 2 other people helping you. I used to have my mom help you. And we're pulling, at every part of my body to get that fast skin on. And you'd hear people making comments, well, maybe if you had cut back on this a little bit, maybe you could slip into your fast skin a little bit easier. So I think when it came around competition time, when we were told to lean out to be better competitors, I think that's kind of when it heightened, even though I could say it was prevalent all the time too, which I'm sure you have dealt with
Wow.
in events as well. So
I think that's really interesting to hear because in gymnastics we had on leotards, which
Mhm.
obviously are not ideal. However, you would get the size that fits you. So that really took me off guard to hear that you get them 6 sizes too small.
yeah, I might be exaggerating, but it was
You sure, you were
certainly
saying.
2 to 3 to 4 sizes too small.
Wow.
Like if I wore a 28 practice suit, I'd order a 25 fast skin or something of that nature. And you look at them and you're like, how the heck is my body ever gonna fit into this little thing? But that's what you did.
And that sends the signal that it's supposed to be as compressed as possible is that for speed or what is that for?
It is for speed, because when you're moving through the water, obviously you want to be as, smooth, glidey as possible. I think a comparison I would make in like a reverse sense is if you're looking at somebody in the Olympics who's doing like shot put, for example, right? You expect to see somebody who's muscular, a little bit bigger, and if you saw somebody who is really tiny and petite, would you think to yourself in your head, like, I don't know if they're gonna throw that shot put that far? Like, when other swimmers perceived other swimmers, there was a notion that if this person's bigger than me, they're not gonna be a fast swimmer. How could they be a fast swimmer? They can't glide through that water. There were a lot of negative connotations about people who, if they looked to like the right and left of them while they were, about to get on the block and do their competition, they saw somebody that was maybe a little bit bigger than them, they're automatically going to think to themselves, well, I'll beat them.
So a lot of comparison in the locker room.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, in high school too, we used to get out of the pool, go in the pool, or go to the locker room and shower like in our bathing suits after practice. And then I get to college, and after everybody gets out of practice in college, everybody's showering completely naked. And that's fine. Like, I think women who were older, me getting in at 18 when I'm still feeling like an itty bitty baby at the time, even though when we're 18, we're like, we're grown.
Yeah.
There's, 22-year-old women who are much less shameful, like just more like confident about how they look. And I'm like, is this the norm? Is this what I have to do? I don't feel the way these women feel. I don't look the way these women feel or look the way these women look. And do you guys feel like even though like women like develop earlier, you still don't necessarily like fill out and become more like curvaceous until your early 20s, mid 20s?
Yeah.
Like,
I joke I went through second puberty.
right. That's my point. Yeah. So when I'm 18 and I'm like, well, I have no hips, I have no butt, I don't look how these like gorgeous women with like curvy hips and everything look, it starts to really take a toll on you day in, day out. You're seeing, I mean, swimming what, 4 hours a day, every day, 6 days a week.
So you simultaneously had to be in a thinner body to be successful in swimming, and then evaluating your body next to these women in the locker room of, oh, but I want to be curvy, I want to be what a woman looks like.
Right.
There's no winning.
There is no winning. No. It's yeah. And especially in college, we used to be able to wear 2-piece practice suits, which in high school wasn't really a thing, but in college we wore these teeny tiny like competition 2-piece practice suits, especially in Florida. When we're swimming outdoors, most of the time, most other states you're swimming indoors, so you're not really worried about your tan lines or getting tan. But in Florida, you're worried about, I don't want this weird 1-piece swimmer tan. So you could wear little 2-piece suits that were, guys, I'm not kidding you, I'll have to show you a picture. The lowest of the low rise suits.
I think I remember you wearing those. I do.
They are so thin. They cover nothing, they leave nothing to the imagination, and you have to tie them so tight because you can't swim practice in a regular bathing suit,
Right.
it'll fly off of you.
So you didn't even really have other options. So
No.
say you were uncomfortable with the attire, you were not able to just maybe wear something that's a different size or more coverage that would have impeded your ability to succeed at your sport.
For practice, it was the norm in college for all the girls when it was sunny outside to wear those little two-piece Jolene suits, is what we called them. So if you didn't wear them, you had the weird tan lines, you were also the odd one out, which left yourself more comparison to the others too. Yeah. Those, I'll have to show you guys a picture of those suits, they're crazy.
And with the way you're talking, it kind of makes it sound like this might be close to a universal experience for swimmers, maybe even understanding the relationship with the attire. Did coaches ever talk to you about how you felt in your body or how you felt with the attire? Did they ask you or check in?
You know, no.
Yeah.
And I was thinking back to it when I was thinking about coming on here, and I'm like, I don't know if I was ever screened the way that you should probably screen somebody who's exercising 4 hours a day, 6 days a week. I had no idea until I left the sport how many calories I was burning every single day and what I could or should be eating. I had no idea. For college, we had one physical at the start of the year where they took our weight and took our blood pressure. You know, I can't speak for every school and what they do, but if you looked okay, then you moved on. And as you both probably know better than anybody else, you know, disordered eating or eating disorders don't look or appear a certain way. So somebody can have an okay weight on the scale, and that doesn't mean that they're not struggling or that they need help. And I don't, you know, I don't have anything bad to say about, you know, my high school and club coaches, but like nobody ever, or college coaches, different story, but nobody ever asks you, what are you eating? How much are you eating? Are you eating the right things? Enough protein? I didn't even know that like diet was something that I should be thinking about. It was just completely not something I thought about or was asked about.
Meanwhile, you were required to do countless hours of training, and your body likely wasn't meeting the nutritional needs it required, doing all of that like, very extraneous exercise.
Yeah, I think about it too in terms of swimming is not a sport that's a revenue sport. Like we didn't have a lot of resources, even at I'm sure schools that were more prestigious than the school that I was swimming at. You know, people don't sell tickets to swim meets. We don't have the dietitians, the nutritionists, the trainers that football, baseball, the more like high revenue sports have. So we didn't get any of that attention. And I think back to, like I think about swimmers at large, and such a small percent of the population is able to make like a profession out of swimming. Like think about, you can probably name like Katie Ledecky or Michael Phelps, the people that can do it as a profession and afford like the support and resources, all the things that they would need to know what they need to do, how to fuel their body. But for I would say like 98% of the swimmers who are not pursuing it as a professional avenue, what resources do we have to make sure that, you know, we're okay and we're doing what we need to do to fuel our body, you know?
I think that's really interesting to hear because it kind of with my own sport and you know in club it's kind of the exact same way. You can't afford to have
Right.
a nutritionist, a dietitian, those sort of things. At least in the gymnastics world too, nobody checked in on quote unquote if I was eating enough. They would check in though if I was eating too much, quote unquote, right? And so
Yeah.
there were, you know, kind of in our other podcasts, we talked about things like losing your summer and such, but nobody checked in with me either. But once I got to college, they actually did. But I think what's also though interesting is you could say, oh, we had nutritionists on staff for gymnastics. Were they ED trained, certified? No. Were the meal plans that they would give comparable to probably what I needed? Not enough. So that's the other thing that I hear is it's like one, the accessibility based on are we a revenue sport? But then even if you quote unquote are slightly more with that, we still didn't have any ED trained services, right? So even if it's like I need help, so you're saying I couldn't get any of it. And I'm saying it almost was like this shadow of look, we have this resource. well, look what we have for our athletes. But there was no certification there. There was no training. There was no awareness. I think for us, they asked us a question. Yeah, have you ever struggled with an eating disorder on a piece of paper? And it's like you put yes or no.
Yeah, check the box.
Where is that information going to? I'm making this huge disclosure, and who am I telling?
Right.
I wonder what would have happened. Obviously, I struggled myself, but I put no because these things are secretive too. So you're saying I wasn't screened. My screening was, what does her weight look like each year, and
Check a box,
what
yes or
box
no.
did she check?
Yeah.
What sort of experience did you have with dance surrounding food, body, dietary needs?
So it really depended on different communities that I was in. So in the dance culture, you go to summer camp every year, and a dance summer camp. And it
Yeah.
was actually a lot of fun. And one community I went to actually had a whole nutrition class, and we learned how to fuel your body while also working out the amount of hours that we were in, how many when we were doing performances, how many hours we were just training. And then others, not so much. There is actually a book called like The Dancer's Diet, and I remember I was given it at maybe 11 years old from another friend. Like she was probably 13, so I don't know where she got it, but she was just telling me what someone else had told her, and I looked at it, and the diet was jarring, and I remember feeling so much shame that I was not following this regimen. But as you were talking about the was it fast
Faskins. Mhm.
so we had costumes and that were given every year, and we didn't get new costumes. So you had to fit into the same costume as a
Oh.
14-year-old as you did as an 18-year-old.
Wow.
And sometimes you were even not given parts because you couldn't fit into the costume. So you could have had the best ballerina, she wouldn't have gotten the sugar plum part because she couldn't fit into the costume. So when I was dancing, I have large breasts, my breasts were bound to fit into costumes. And that was a way that they were willing to modify my body. For other people who couldn't necessarily fit into the costume, they just weren't awarded the part, even if they were maybe better than I was.
Wow.
Yeah,
I had no
I
idea. Wow.
For people that are just listening to this podcast, we all just had a moment kind of staring.
Yeah.
Because it's just that's really crazy, and the fact that somebody gave you that book, and I'm terrified of what was in it.
That's
Yeah, I don't want to
jarring.
repeat it.
Yeah, but even just hearing like my breasts were bound. How old were you?
7th grade, so 13, 11, 12, 13.
It actually reminds me of a situation that I know of. I won't name who it is, but there's somebody in my life that I'm aware of that got a scholarship for D1 gymnastics. And they had to go up early in the summer because I was required, voluntold.
Right.
But that they actually were required to get a breast reduction
Wow.
because they didn't want the breasts of her size on the team. This woman has since now gotten the breasts that she wanted and dreamed of returned. But at the rightful age of 17 or 18, it was strongly suggested to get them reduced.
Yeah.
So we're talking about reductions of bodies, binding bodies. We're talking about getting stuff that's too small for our bodies
To squeeze into.
and then not a lot of resources,
Yeah.
not a lot of screening.
Yeah. Well, I was actually thinking, I never would have put swimmers in the community of people that I would initially screen for an eating disorder, because it's technically like an endurance sport, right? Whereas gymnastics and dance, it's an aesthetic sport. But there are so many vulnerabilities and risk factors that is probably leaving this community incredibly undocumented in terms of statistics too.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think simply, can you guys think of another sport besides dance, gymnastics, swimming, maybe cheer, where your bodies are on such public display? Because,
Wrestling.
yeah,
Yeah.
like as a woman, where every part of you is being, it wasn't even, again, like being a swimmer, I'm like, how does this one piece of body hair look? How does this, are people like perceiving this one scar that I have? Maybe this acne that I have on my butt, it was so much things that you would never see in the day-to-day life when you're just wearing normal clothes, but you're so much more focused on, look at all of these imperfections that I have that now everybody else is privy to have, not just in terms of how does my, skin look, how does my body look? It's everything. And once you start to pick apart yourself, it's like, what are the things that I can control, one of them being my weight, essentially. So I think that partially contributes to all of that we were just talking about.
There's another comparison with swimming, that just prior to this, when I was just kind of thinking of some questions and such, that I noticed. In gymnastics, we had an attainable perfect to achieve, right? If I work hard enough, I'll get to 10, and theoretically 10 would be enough. For swimming, there's no bar. You can just keep getting a faster and faster time.
Right.
And it reminds me of
I just felt my body shut down. You're like, yep.
it reminds me though of the pathology with an eating disorder, that it's never enough that you could just keep going down or keep doing more. How did you navigate that idea of you were chasing something that never stopped?
I still struggle with that every day, because I think when I was thinking about this podcast before I was coming on and how swimming related to eating disorder pathology, I was thinking the exact same thing of, you feel in your head sometimes, well, if I can just get to this weight, then I'll be happy. Then what happens when you achieve that? Well, maybe if I can just get to this weight now, then I'll be happy. Same thing with swimming. I mean, unless you're, again, the Katie Ledecky of the world, breaking every world record, which nobody is except for her, you know what I mean? You're always thinking, well, if I can just get this best time, then I'll be good enough. If I can just qualify for this meet, I'll be good enough. And nowadays, today, I try to sit back and ask myself, why is what I achieved right now not good enough? Like, why either is the body I'm in not good enough? Why isn't this best time that I just got, and getting first at this meet, why is that not good enough? So sometimes it's great to work towards a goal. And sometimes, I feel like we were so conditioned as athletes to always be the best, achieve the best, that there was never a limit to like what that was.
That really parallels eating disorder pathology too, that it's never enough. With my clients, we always are saying, well, I moved the field goal to what would finally make me happy about my body. And you're just always 5 feet behind the goal line because it never feels enough.
Right. Exactly.
I think that the three of us, being ex-athletes, but then also achieving higher levels of education, is also something that maybe is comparable too, right? It's like, well, you get the undergrad and then you're like, oh, I'll go get the master's. And I think that even, we pre-talked about some things too. It's like, okay, well, we've got Dr. Zoe Ross-Nash over here. We have a future doctor here getting a doctorate now. It's something I've considered. It's almost like this taught us from a formative age to just keep going and not say stop, right? Even as we discuss our ventures right now, it's like, one, all three of us are engaged, right? Actively engaged and newly engaged. So we're planning weddings, and then we're also starting new businesses. We're getting new degrees. We're doing new publications. It's really interesting because it gives me more compassion for my clients when I'm like, guys, why isn't this good enough? It's almost like,
I completely agree. I think I wish there was more support for athletes who had a sport be their entire identity for virtually their entire life, and then they exit the sport and they think, what do I do now? Who am I now? What can I control about my life now? Because as a student, I did always think the same thing. I can just get my bachelor's. Oh, nope. If I can just get my master's. Oh, nope. If I can just get my doctorate, then I'll have achieved everything. But it's the competitiveness of the sport and doing something your whole life and always working towards that next goal, that next fix. It's like, what now? Why can't I be complacent with what I have right now? Why isn't it good enough too? I think between high athletic achievement, high academic achievement, the prevalence of eating disorders, I think there's a factor that comes into play between the type A personality, overachiever personality, wanting to be the best, that all kind of can be intertwined.
Yeah, I think what that reminds me of is whenever I'll have clients come in, and I work with a lot of kids, so parents will kind of just talk to me about their kiddo, and a lot of the time you're like, man, they're just a straight A kid, like they can do it, they're straight A's, they're hardworking. And I just kind of sit there and nod and say, I'm sure they are. Because where you seek to achieve in other areas of your life, they're really seeking to achieve within their body as well. And I think that with all of our sports, whether there was an attainable goal or not of getting that 10, or winning or something of that nature, there was still maybe somebody better across the country too.
Always.
So even with eating disorders, I hear a lot, well, if I could just do this. But then there's always gonna be somebody else. There's always somebody that did something more than you did. And I think the sports may have normalized it a little bit for us. And it also normalized comparison, right? You're actively competing against other dance teams, right? Actively competing against other dancers, maybe to get a role, competing against other swimmers to get a spot in the relay. For us, that was it. Yeah, just competing to get a lineup spot. We learned to compare, and you better pass them.
Mhm.
And I think that could have been morphed into bodies pretty quickly. And I think for me it did. And so I'm interested kind of to hear your guys' perception on, you guys clearly were faced with these challenges relating to bodies and comparisons. Was there ever an inkling in your brain that went, I'm gonna take some different measures? Because for me, where I'm sitting, my brain went, we gotta do something, right? We gotta change this. We have to, either be the thinnest or whatever that was. Did you guys kind of navigate those thoughts? I know we've shared that you're, not a recovered clinician, that you have interpersonal relationships with it, but did you guys have those thoughts as well?
I think every woman has thoughts. We live in a society that praises thinness. Honestly, I think a lot of the reasons, so I see people typically 16 and up or 18 and up. I think a lot of athletes end their athletic career and then finally notice the eating disorder is going on because previously the eating disorder was functional within their sport. And when it no longer becomes functional, they realize all the problems it was causing. So I think what prevented me is I had my mom who was in recovery. She showed me and modeled all the ways that it's actually not functional within your sport. It's actually harming you significantly. You're more likely to get injured. You can't perform X amount of hours a day if you're not nourishing yourself. So I think that having my mom model healthy relationships with food was single-handedly the reason why I did not develop an eating disorder, despite being totally inundated with these thoughts and having them myself, but having a safe person to talk to them about it and not then be normal and not just getting that book of the dancer's diet and be like, Mom, whew, and she was
Yeah.
like, no.
Wow.
So that was my predisposition, but it was also what saved me.
The power of one person, and that's something I can kind of relate to as well. I was lucky enough to just have a fabulous coach in college, that said, no, this is not working. And I was like, yes, it is, it's making me. And I'm like, and she said, no, it's not, honey, and we're actually gonna work on it, and this is harming you. And it's interesting that that was one person for you, and it was your mom, and for me, it was really came down to one person. By the end of it, there was a team, right, and therapists and whatever, but it was one person that shook me and said, one, the line I'll never forget is, I won't be going to your funeral if it's soon, Maria, which hit me, because I was like, I would never die from this, right? But then two, she said, stop. And I remember that she looked at me too, she goes, I don't care if you ever compete for me again. She goes, I care that you're here, and I care that you're happy. That's crazy. I think people need to hear that you can be that one person for somebody too. Even Emily sharing about the swimming right now, there might be a young swimmer listener on here right now that's hearing that this is relatable and that you don't need to abide by it, but that it's also that we hear your struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish there sometimes really all it takes is one person to ask the right questions to be that voice of support. For me, it was more so like my friends, like somebody like Maria who knew me very well, and I'm fortunate that she did and is and was my best friend to be able to know, like, you know, are you taking care of yourself? But again, without that support that I got from you or other friendships, I don't know if I would have asked myself the proper questions either, because I wasn't necessarily asked by, once you get to college, your parents aren't necessarily asking you what you're eating, how you're eating. My coaches weren't asking me, my teammates weren't asking me. But all it really takes is that one person to make you stop and think, well, maybe there's something I need to be listening to here.
Wow. And none of us were asked early enough.
Yeah. And that's why what you guys are doing is so, so, so important, because maybe there's somebody out there that there's not even a friend asking them, right? But you have this, and maybe you're listening to this and you're thinking to yourself, well, maybe I'll stop and I'll ask myself that question too.
I have a client who watched the show Physical. Have you ever seen it? It's a really beautifully done show around a woman's struggle with an eating disorder. And my client watched the show and she was like, oh my God, that's what I do. I didn't know anyone else did that.
Wow.
So the eating disorder really survives on secrecy. So it exists because no one's saying, hey, what's going on? And for my client to see herself represented in media and then was able to come get care. I mean, finding an eating disorder therapist is near impossible.
Yeah.
But she was able to find me, and we've done beautiful work because she was able to recognize in someone else. So that's why that one person kind of knowing about eating disorders is going to be incredibly fundamental for athletic teams too.
The secrecy point is huge because yes, one just might not even know, and that's something I could definitely relate to in my past. There'd be certain things that I did that either I felt really shameful about, or I was like, nobody does this. And then once I started hearing that other people did this, I was like, oh, and then I learned that's eating disorder pathology, not just a Maria thing. But for a little bit, I was like, I just eat funky, like it's a fun thing. And I remember actually fully thinking that, like, this is not like an eating disorder. I just eat kind of weird, like I have weird things on food. Then I started meeting some other individuals in group settings and they were saying what was in my head. And I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
And it made me not ignore, because I went, if we're all thinking this, then they have eating disorders, right? So that's why it shields from telling other people, because no, you're gonna learn too much and then you notify. You don't notify, you're not gonna do a darn thing. And that's what the ED wants, right?
Yeah.
I think too, what all of us faced were a lot of hours of training, which also taught us to kind of ignore certain needs. If you're tired, I'm sorry, it doesn't matter. You still have a 5-hour practice to do. Suck it up and figure it out. We didn't learn to check in with our needs and then listen to them. We learned check in with our need. Go, am I tired today? Yeah. Do I still need to go do all of my conditioning and laps? Yeah. So we learned to disregard our emotions, disregard the signs our body's telling us. And what happens with an eating disorder? Disregard the signs. I'm hungry. No, you're not. You can go longer.
I truly believe eating disorders are a disorder of disconnection, and athletes are really taught kind of to disconnect from your body, disconnect from those pain cues. My brother was a football player in college, and he played through so many concussions. And what happens when we do that? We turn off our body. We say it's game time. We get back on the field. Okay, and what happens when that generalizes to other areas of our life and we're no longer picking up on our pain signals, our pain cues, our hunger cues, our full receptors, and our body just becomes a stranger.
And we're afraid to not do that because when somebody like Simone Biles, the most accomplished, amazing gymnast in the entire world, says something's not right, I need to take a break, all you see all over social media is everybody saying, you're a quitter, you're this, you're that. Like, what? A lot of grown men in the comments saying a lot of things about something they would never be able to fathom or understand. So it's like, how do I know when to take care of myself and also know when I'm making the right decision and won't face all these eyes, all these whispers? You know, how do you make that distinction?
I think too, though, we worked really hard for something, right? And so if you look back in your life and you've been doing 30-hour weeks for 10 years, you finally make it to college and then something's hurting you. Even if, and I was very lucky to have a coach and trainer that wanted me to be healthy. And if something was wrong, they would sit me out even if I didn't want to. But I wanted to ignore them because I worked so hard to get here. Gosh darn it, I want to compete. Now in this day and age, there's actually a lot going on with scholarships where they can actually pull them now, which really scares me because I don't know if I would have spoken up about an eating disorder if I knew that. Granted, I would have in my environment because of who I was around. If I was in a different environment, I wouldn't. And if I've got an injury that's acting up and they're deciding on they're renewing my scholarship again, I don't know if I'd speak up. So that's actually something that scares me about the future. It already scared me because what if I got pulled from the lineup?
Right.
But that's the other thing is you work so hard and my body's trying to say no and I still fight it to say yes.
Well, there's so much on the line. So it's not just, oh, I'm gonna get pulled from the lineup. What if, okay, they pull my scholarship. Oh my gosh, I don't have access to education anymore.
Right.
What if I can't afford to stay here? What sort of consequences are there for me to speak up when I am struggling, whether it's a mental health concern or a physical concern?
Oh, this is something I haven't really thought of before, but an eating disorder takes away a lot. So when people don't want to give it up, they're like, well, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did all these things. It's kind of like in a sport too, once you've done so much, you almost can't get out.
Cognitive dissonance.
Right, yes, it's kind of like, I blatantly ignored my cues for years, I'm gonna listen now. You're almost like in too deep, and the other thing too is, at least for how it works for gymnastics, is we had to dedicate hours and hours, I would go to practice, you would do this too, we go to practice before school, and then we do school, and then we practice after school.
Yeah.
And I actually even had to drop out of a certain academic program,
Oh, yeah.
because I couldn't maintain the hours they needed after school to do it, so
Mhm.
actually, not only did I not have access to higher level education, but I actually wouldn't have even had the credentials I could have had without my sport.
Yeah.
So there was a certain program that just could not continue, that I would love to continue if I could, but actually my sport took that away. And then it created, didn't have the playing field I wanted.
And you
Right.
can't develop your identity outside of the sport. Like for a long time, I was just a dancer, and I'm sure that you were just a swimmer and you were
Mhm.
just a gymnast. And then when I was working in college counseling, I would work with these seniors who were transitioning out of sport, and they would have no sense of self outside of their athletic identity.
Yeah,
And wanna know what slips in when you don't know who you are? An eating disorder.
absolutely.
So it's such a vulnerable time too. My mom was a professional ballerina, and she shared that when she was exiting dance, she was like, I don't have many other skill sets right now. She had to reinvent herself. And a lot of times the eating disorder really rears its head around that time too.
Yeah, that's so important. Like, again, I really wish there was more people like you, that maybe for people that were transitioning out of something that had been their entire life, their entire identity, going from I'm doing this sport, I'm competing, it's a full-time job, 40 hours a week, 30 to 40 hours a week, to I'm graduated and what next? What do I do? Who am I? What about my life? Like you're saying, can I control? And there's very little things. It's so hard to reinvent yourself. Like your mom, amazing, fantastic. Such a hard thing to do. Not something I was able to accomplish once I, quit swimming, and I'm still working to be who's Emily without swimming, who's Emily without school. But now I'll do the doctorate because,
Yeah.
I'm working towards something, but still it's so, so, so hard to do. And I wish there were more resources and support for people who are basically abandoning their entire identity and trying to find out who the heck they are now.
Right. And I think, that's a perfect opportunity for an eating disorder to kind of surge. We talked a little bit about the screening and if we felt like that was there, but it's almost like, at least in gymnastics, they were talked about a lot. So I actually even knew that was a possibility. And I can actually think in my head of people that when they left the sport, their eating disorders did actually kind of worsen, or show up. But how are eating disorders discussed in your guys' sports? For us, they were kind of slightly congratulated. In gymnastics, they were kind of like, oh, you're working really hard. You're a good athlete if you're this dedicated. And also they were kind of taboo, like, really, you're gonna do that? It was kind of like looked down upon, like you can't just like stay in shape, whatever way, it's
You have to
terrible.
cheat.
Yes, you have to cheat. So part of it was glamorized because wow, you're really committed, and part of it was like, really, that's what you have to resort to. How was the language around eating disorders discussed, respectively, in dance and swimming?
I know it's tough.
So there's a quote: "The eating disorder suddenly I can't speak. The eating disorder is simultaneously the victim and the perpetrator." And you would witness someone engage in eating disorder pathology and be like, oh, well, that's how they stay so thin, like they're cheating, and then you get angry at it, and then all of a sudden you start engaging in those behaviors, and you are like, oh gosh, this is actually an incredibly painful experience, and yet you can't stop because you're being congratulated, you're getting those parts, you're in the lineup, people are complimenting on how good you look, and you said a sentence a couple moments ago of, and what am I now working towards? The eating disorder becomes a thing that you can work towards.
Yeah.
And as you were saying, people get congratulated for the eating disorder. Well, then you start congratulating yourself. Like, well, I didn't get that part, but you know what? I did really well with the eating disorder today. And it becomes a thing that steals everything else from your life.
Yeah.
Well, that didn't really
Yeah.
answer your question, but
That's okay. I love the spinoff. So excellent. And that's okay, because I'm curious, I feel like dance and gym have some similarities with how those things were perceived. I'm really curious in a non-aesthetic sport, how eating disorders were discussed.
Gosh, there were just, I don't think there were a lot of conversations on what we were eating or what we weren't eating. It was all very body focused because, again, essentially for the 4 hours a day, 6 days a week that you're practicing, you're essentially almost completely naked with a couple little things covering you here and there. So it's, oh wow, like, Emily looks like she's lost a couple pounds. Like, she's definitely going to get that best time on your meet on Saturday. You know what I mean? Like, you hear whispers, you hear things, you hear, especially having co-ed team, you hear things from the men about how the women look, and the ones that aren't necessarily stick thin and are a little bit bigger, how they perceive them to not look as, or you know what I mean, to not look as well.
Mhm.
So a lot of it was just so focused on, if you looked a certain way, if you fit into a certain suit, then you were going to be the best swimmer, right? If you had anything that stuck out that people could perceive as, not the norm, quote unquote, then you're not going to be perceived as the person who's going to show up to that meet and win on Saturday.
Yeah, and so what you're basically saying is that it was just the body that was discussed, not eating,
Always.
it's just the body.
Yeah.
Were there any though, like eating patterns or exercise patterns that were normalized that maybe would also fit into an eating disorder pathology? So I know in gymnastics we work out for a lot of long hours. That could be a part of somebody's eating disorder experience. Eating certain things before a meet or after a meet would impact it, and things got kind of normalized. Were there experiences with swimming? I mean, you guys are doing heavy reps sometimes and things of that nature, that maybe an eating disorder could almost go undetected.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, the exercising 4 hours a day in swimming, a sport where you're the 2 hours that you're swimming in the morning, 2 hours that you're swimming in the afternoon, it's nonstop. You get maybe 2 minutes on the wall after a set to take a break, but you are going and your heart rate is in that red zone for 2 hours straight. So the amount of calories that you're burning, it unfathomable, really. So nobody ever says to me or to my peers, make sure that you know that you're burning 4,000 calories a day. You need to eat enough to maintain what your body needs to do to be able to perform at this level that you want to perform at. But that wasn't spoken about. So, of course, you think, well, I'm going to eat lean and I'm going to eat healthy and I'll have a salad. And that's not enough. It's not nearly enough to fuel your body to get to its max potential. And you're actually kind of taking away some of your power and your performance by not meeting that threshold that you need.
So basically it was normalized to overtrain and underfuel.
Absolutely. And I remember like mornings before, like nights before swim meet, they tell you to load up on carbs. Not that that actually does anything or should do anything. You should be eating balanced and nutritious the entire time and fueling your body the entire time and not the night before. But in the morning, it was kind of the norm to, like, sometimes meets didn't start that early in the morning. Sometimes they were mid-afternoon. But don't eat in the morning and make sure you drink an entire energy drink so you're hyped up, you're ready to go. You have all those anxiety, nerves, jitters that are going to make you so fast and so powerful. But is that healthy? Is that correct? Is that what we should be doing? Absolutely not.
But it was encouraged and it
Absolutely.
helped you succeed, quote unquote.
Yep.
It made me think of when you brought up the gender differences. When I was dancing, we would dance with partners, and the partners would prefer the smaller women because we were girls at the time. So I'm gonna say girls because we were under 18. And that's how young these messages were given to us. They preferred the smaller girls because they were easier to lift. And some of the men would make comments about our bodies if we were the harder ones to lift.
Oh, man.
Wow.
Yeah.
That actually opens up the conversation of how eating disorders can be seen or perceived in sports that also have the opposite gender present. So you're right, I can picture back other teams, and I had never experienced a male gymnast being in my presence until I went to college. And that actually, I could see how the males had their own experiences with their body in an aesthetic sport as well. But I would have never thought early on, hearing how somebody, if they would have lifted me, that would have really impacted, well, am I the easiest to lift? That they want to choose me, therefore I'm going to act in a certain manner. And that would actually dictate a part as well. If a certain couple is doing a certain part of a show, that would dictate a lot as well. I think this is where it gets complicated in higher level athletics. Eating disorder symptoms and behaviors theoretically can quote unquote improve your success. And
It's the function of it.
that's the function. What's hard is even in gymnastics, and I hate even saying this because I don't want any young gymnast to hear this and think this is better. But there are certain things that you could do with your body if it felt lighter. And I hate even saying that because it's not what you should be striving for. Unfortunately, it's also not wrong. And it also sounds like what you're saying too is that being lighter, quote unquote, did improve the functionality of maybe a certain move or making something look more graceful. For you, it truly is less displacement of water.
Yep.
I think that's where we find this challenging line of it found a function and eating disorders can thrive off of it because it's quote unquote not wrong. Yeah. So how do we approach that? How do we approach the things that are very real, like the lifting situation? What is something that you would recommend to somebody if they're a dancer, a young dancer, and they're saying, but I really want to get this part, which means this guy needs to be able to lift me? How would you approach that discussion with them?
I'm actually working with an athlete right now, and we're trying to figure out if now is an appropriate time to return to play after an eating disorder related injury, because they were not nourishing their body and then they got injured. And I asked her, I said, how long will this matter? And she said, a year. And I said, in 5 years, when you can't move your body, will this have been worth it? And she was like, no. So you have to look at the long term versus and granted, when you are going through it, it is the most important aspect of your life. It's part of your identity. Sports are important, and we need to look at the long term consequences. And when you are 16, 17 years old, it's really hard to make those decisions. However, we want longevity and we want to take care of ourselves. How long is this going to be important in our life? That's the question I ask.
I think that's an amazing question to ask. I wish somebody would ask any athlete who's going to pursue a sport in college, or even if it's somebody, who's choosing to end it in high school and to move on, what's going to be next when this ends for you? Because I never thought to myself, well, I'm going to go to the Olympics for this. It was something that I just wanted to do in college, and I was fortunate to be able to do so, but nobody ever said, well, this is coming to an end someday. So how are you going to prepare yourself for when it does come to an end? And mine came to an end completely abruptly, which I was not prepared for, which contributes to a lot more of the identity crisis, I think. So I think that's exactly the right question to be asking people early on, if it's possible at all, is what do you need to prepare yourself for when this ends, because it's going to end at some point, and you need to be prepared when it does.
And that's where I try to tell families and coaches, can you start complimenting your athletes or your kids on things outside of academic performance and athletic performance? Remind them that they are a human first. You are so funny. I love your sense of humor, right? Wow, your ability to make people feel seen and heard in a room is awesome. But a lot of times, if all they've been praised for is you are an excellent swimmer and you're gonna go D1 someday, what do you have going for you? I'm a D1 swimmer, right? For me, I'm a D1 gymnast. I made it. And then I was congratulated for that. And I was congratulated for having, a good GPA and, academically gifted, those sort of things. But then it's like, okay, so I'm not in school anymore. I'm also not a gymnast. And I no longer have my eating disorder. I now have a strong sense of identity of who I am, but man, was that a trek to get here.
Oh my gosh.
When you stopped your athletics, did you ever get the question, well, how are you gonna keep the weight off? Well, now that you're not dancing, now that you're not swimming, now that you're not in the gym, how are you gonna keep the weight off?
Actually, what I heard a warning of be careful, you're used to working out so much, be careful when you stop that. Or I would hear things like enjoy it while it lasts, you don't even have to try. Yes, so the answer is yes. And that's so sad too, that the most concerning point for people is, are you going to maintain your athletic body when you're not an athlete? My question is, why would I do that? Number one. Why would I do that? Number two, I'm not an athlete anymore.
Yeah.
I am not an athlete anymore, and that is okay. But I think that even leads into what kind of exercise and movement to engage with. Because I basically learned if you're not really thinking you could basically pass out, you didn't push yourself in that workout.
Oh my god.
So now, just as a regular human, I was just supposed to learn to work out and just do it for my body and my health and my movement. No, I was like, I'm supposed to be passing out, so then I felt like I wasn't doing enough, right?
I think that's contributed to a huge contributor to some of my like unhealthy exercise related habits that followed me after I quit the sport. I just had to add the tidbit that when I was in college, we would do sets, get to the wall, our coach would require us to take our heart rate. And if our heart rate wasn't above like literally 180, they would say, keep going until it is. So, like, thinking back on that, when I thought that was normal and I thought that's the way that we were supposed to push our body to like literal passing out and failure, we did have people pass out. We did have people get out of the pool and throw up. That's the measure that we like, again, expected ourselves to perform to.
And then that athlete probably got told, good job for pushing themselves. Or I can even remember, well, then maybe you should be in better shape. This is impacting you so much. Maybe that means we need to get stronger, huh? Because they're not throwing up, they're not getting sick. So, man, it's so much. It's so much. And I'm so glad that we're doing this segment about multiple sports, because sports that are very different, right? Even if dance and gymnastics have some similarities, they are very different in nature. And it's obviously swimming, yet we had extremely universal, similar experiences.
Yeah.
And then we all had actually different relationships with exercise, food, and our body.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's powerful. It's complex. Some of the stuff you've been talking about has literally been making me like emotional sitting here thinking like, you know, I do hope, I don't know if I'll ever have kids, but one day the praise for something that doesn't have to do with athletic achievement or academic achievement and is focused on who you are. That I'm so glad that you said that because that's so important. And I feel like people who don't have necessarily close bonds with their parents can really struggle with, well, I can make them happy in this way. This is what I can do to make them proud of me. And then when that ends, am I gonna make my parents proud anymore? That was one of the number one things that I felt when my swimming career abruptly ended is, what is my dad gonna think of me now? Like, and it's something I still struggle with, and I think it's something that I feel like a lot of athletes struggle with.
And it could probably quickly morph into, if I can't make my parents proud, maybe I can make them worried.
Yeah, that like give you goosebumps.
Right? If I can't make them proud of my sport, maybe I can make them worried with my eating disorder in my body.
How can I make them pay attention to me now?
Right.
I don't have meets for them to go to. I don't have things for them to cheer for me for. How can I get their attention?
Well, this has all just been so impactful, and I appreciate our candidness today. And even now, we are eating disorder specialists, yes, you are an occupational therapist, yes, we are also still women in this world that happen to be either kind, bubbly, compassionate, and we still have those things. And I hope if you're listening too, that even if you overly identify with your job, we are not just therapists, psychologists, occupational therapists. We are women that have a lot of qualities that have nothing to do with our academic achievement. And I hope that anybody listening to this acknowledges those qualities for themselves. If we want to model it for others, to do it for ourselves as well.
For us to send off, I have a question for all of us. When was the first time you engaged in joyful movement, and what did it feel like? Oh, Maria.
Yeah, that's what made me think. That was a really good question. And joyful movement, and what did it feel like? Oh, joyful, unfortunately for me, was after college. And I think, wow, it felt amazing because I actually can remember this day, now that you're saying that. I went to the gym and I remember being like, wow, I'm not feeling so good. So I did a different exercise. And then I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna end with like a little mindful walk. And I actually remember I played some music in my ears that like I was like jamming. There was not really a lot of people jamming. I remember kind of being like, oh, you just did that out loud, Maria, or like you just did that visually. And I actually got in the car and I was down and realized, wow, you did nothing we planned on doing. That was not the exercise you planned on doing. And you literally physically moved your body in a dancing motion on a treadmill in front of other people. So I'm really glad you asked that question because I remember the day.
Wow.
So I appreciate that question. I'm interested to hear your guys' stories as well.
Yeah, honestly, I think it was one of the first times, definitely post college swim days. I think it was the first time I went to like a music festival
Cool.
because I was just able to be free flowing, like feeling the music, listening to the music, moving my body in a way where I wasn't pushing myself beyond exertion and I wasn't really focusing on the end goal is that I achieve 2 hours of exercise. It's that I'm moving my body, I feel good, you know? Yeah.
That's a great example because it shows movement does not have to be intentional exercise.
No, yeah.
Movement for you was you engaging with your body, you being in touch with your body and the stimulus that was around you. Awesome.
Yeah.
That is very cool. I think mine, was young. It was a freshman in college, and I came home before the holidays and I went to a yoga class with my friend. And I just remember being so present in my body. All of a sudden the class was finished and we were in Shavasana. And I felt every aspect of my body. I was connected to it. I could tell you like the position of my pinky toe. Like that's how connected I was to my body. And it wasn't of there was no mirrors in the room. I wasn't looking at my friend to see how she was doing. I just was very in tune with all of the movement I was experiencing and didn't care if I like did a headstand or anything. I was just so content with the way my body was interacting with my soul at that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what, I love that shows that all the stuff that we went through, it can be unlearned, and we all unlearned it in different timings, in different ways. But I hope that that can give some people hope that no matter how long you've heard this sort of language, or know how long you've, thought this way about exercise, that it can change.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate everybody who has been listening, and I appreciate the company of these two wonderful women. Again, I would like to give just a shout out and a thank you to our advertiser, Alsana. Very grateful for their locations in Alabama and California and their virtual options that are available as well. And we truly appreciate everybody tuning in today.
Wherever you are, whoever you are, come take a seat with us. See you all next time.